You held the door for a stranger this morning. You remembered to recycle your coffee cup. Small acts of goodness, barely noticed. But your brain noticed. It's keeping score. What if I told you that very act of kindness might be setting you up to do something a little less kind later? This is the psychology of moral licensing. I'm your host, and this is the Psychology of People, where we explore the hidden mechanics of human behavior. Today, the accounting system you never knew you had. Imagine you just donated $50 to charity. Feels good, right? Now imagine someone asks you to volunteer this weekend. Research suggests you're actually less likely to say yes. Not because you're a bad person, because you've already made a deposit in what psychologists call your moral bank account, and now you feel entitled to a withdrawal. This phenomenon is called moral licensing, and it explains why the most virtuous act you perform today might quietly greenlight your next ethical shortcut. The story of moral licensing research begins in 2001, when psychologists Monin and Miller conducted a now famous study on hiring decisions and racial bias. They gave participants a choice between candidates of different races. Some participants first completed a task that let them prove they weren't prejudiced. The results were startling. Those who had first demonstrated non-prejudiced credentials were significantly more likely to subsequently favor white candidates over equally qualified black candidates. Having proven they weren't racist, participants felt licensed to make a choice that looked to outside observers pretty racist. Their earlier goodness had purchased them permission. This pattern has been replicated across dozens of domains. When people initially behave morally, they become more likely to display problematic behaviors afterward, the core moral licensing effect. Think about that for a moment. We like to believe that doing good creates momentum, that one kind act leads naturally to another. But the research suggests something more complicated. Sachdeva, and Medine proposed a moral self-regulation framework in 2010. They suggested we maintain an internal moral identity that we constantly monitor and adjust. When we do something good, our moral self-concept rises, and when it rises too high, we subconsciously feel we've earned the right to coast a little. A 2025 meta-analysis from Rotella and colleagues revealed something important. Moral licensing operates primarily as a social phenomenon. It's strongest when people feel they're being observed. This explains why early research found strong effects in laboratory settings, while later online studies where participants sat alone at computers sometimes failed to replicate the findings. The researchers found that when participants believed their choices were being tracked or witnessed, moral licensing nearly doubled in strength compared to anonymous conditions. It turns out we're not just keeping a moral ledger for ourselves. We're performing our goodness for an audience, even an imagined one. And that performance grants us future freedom. But here's where it gets stranger. A study in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology found that you don't even need to do the good deed. You can license bad behavior by merely planning to be good later. Participants who merely anticipated performing a moral action in the future displayed more racial bias than those in the control group. The good deed hadn't even happened yet. This is prospective moral licensing. Your brain issues you in advance on future goodness. You haven't deposited anything yet, but you're already spending the credit. Perhaps most surprising, a 2025 study published in Japanese Psychological Research found moral licensing effects in preschool-age children. This accounting system starts early. Children in the licensing condition, those who had just recalled doing something nice, were significantly less likely to engage in pro-social behavior when given a subsequent opportunity to help. Before we learn sophisticated moral reasoning, before we understand ethics in any formal sense, we're already running this hidden accounting software. It seems to be built into how we process morality. Research shows people exhibit more moral consistency when thinking abstractly about their values. I am an honest person, but more licensing when thinking concretely about what they've accomplished. When you focus on who you are, you tend to act consistently with that identity. But when you focus on what you've done, you start calculating whether you've done enough to afford a break. Consider environmental behavior. Studies have found that people who purchase eco-friendly products subsequently feel licensed to consume more or ignore other sustainable practices. Brought your reusable bag to the grocery store? Your brain might quietly greenlight leaving all the lights on at home. The math works out, right? Workplace research reveals similar patterns. Employees who receive praise for their integrity or ethical behavior may subsequently feel more entitled to bend rules or cut corners on other tasks. The person who just got an award for honesty isn't suddenly dishonest, but they've made a deposit, and some part of them knows that deposit is available to spend. Here's the uncomfortable truth the research reveals. Our moral behavior is less about fixed character traits and more about dynamic self-regulation. We're constantly adjusting, balancing, negotiating with ourselves. This challenges the intuitive model where good people consistently do good things and bad people consistently do bad things. Reality is messier. We're all moral accountants. The 2025 meta-analysis noted a perplexing inconsistency in moral licensing literature. Some studies found strong effects while others found nothing. The observation factor appears to explain much of this variance. When we're alone, anonymous, unobserved, the licensing effect weakens. But when we feel watched even by ourselves, the moral accounting kicks into high gear. Some researchers have questioned whether moral licensing is a failure of character or simply a natural self-regulatory mechanism, perhaps even functional in preventing moral burnout. Maybe we're not designed to be maximally ethical at every moment. Maybe these small permissions we grant ourselves are how we sustain goodness over the long haul without depleting ourselves entirely. But regardless of its function, knowing about moral licensing gives us something valuable: awareness, and awareness is where change becomes possible. So what can we do with this knowledge? First, notice the internal justification when you're about to make a questionable choice. Listen for that voice saying, "I've been so good lately." That phrase, "I deserve this," is often the licensing effect talking. It's your moral accountant presenting a receipt for past good behavior. Noticing it is the first step to questioning it. Second, be especially vigilant after public acts of virtue. Remember, the effect is strongest when you feel observed. That volunteer work everyone praised? That's exactly when your moral guard drops. Third, and this might be the most important, one, focus on your values and identity rather than tracking specific good deeds. I am honest. Beats I told 3 truths today. Research shows that abstract identity-based thinking promotes consistency, while concrete achievement-based thinking promotes licensing. Think about who you are, not what you've done. And finally, remember that anticipating future good deeds can license present bad behavior too. Don't give yourself moral credit for things you haven't actually done yet. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. We explore stories like this every week, the hidden mechanics that shape how we think, feel, and behave. There's ongoing debate about whether moral licensing has been overstated in popular science coverage. The effect is real, but its size and consistency vary significantly across contexts. Psychology is a young science, and our understanding continues to evolve. What we know for certain is that moral licensing exists. The question is how strong it is and when it matters most. The 2025 meta-analysis provides the clearest picture yet. Moral licensing is primarily a social phenomenon, amplified by observation and attenuated by anonymity. Context is everything. This means the effect might be strongest in exactly the situations where we most want to appear: good professional settings, social gatherings, public commitments, where reputation matters. Understanding this can actually help us be more consistent. When you notice yourself performing virtue for an audience, that's precisely when to be careful about what comes next. The moral of moral licensing, if you'll forgive the pun, isn't that we're all secret hypocrites. It's that our ethical behavior requires ongoing attention, not autopilot. Next time you catch yourself thinking you've earned a moral pass, pause. Ask yourself, am I acting from my values, or am I spending credits from my moral bank account? That pause, that moment of awareness, might be all it takes to keep your accounts balanced in a way that actually matters. I'm your host. This has been The Psychology of People. Until next time, pay attention to the math you're doing, especially the math you don't know you're doing.